How the President of the United States is elected. Most people have a very simple idea of how a democratic election works. Voters pick a candidate, the votes are counted, and whichever candidate has the most votes wins. While that is roughly true, it leaves out a lot of the interesting details. This is especially true of the election of the President of the United States. All of the big money, backroom dealings, and human drama of American elections have inspired novels, movies, and even a manga. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain the process of electing the president as clearly as I can. It starts with political parties. You probably already know that political parties are organizations which exist solely to push political ideas and candidates through official channels and into power. They already have their own internal rules and leadership, and in a lot of countries, the leader of the political party is also the candidate for top office whenever elections roll around. Not so in the United States. Here, the parties select their nominee for office by an entirely different, extremely public selection process. Only the two major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, have any real chance of electing a president. There are three other parties with enough national presence to justify nominating presidential candidates every election. These third parties include the Libertarians, the largest, who basically just want government out of everything, the Green Party, who talk about social justice more than about the environment, and the Constitution Party, which wraps the flag around male chauvinism and the Civil War. Some suggest that our political system inherently discourages voting third party, but I think the low quality of our third parties does too. For the parties that matter, the election begins roughly 2 years before the election day, when various local arms of the parties organize conventions of party loyalists and insiders. They have themes like Leaders of Tomorrow, Values Voters, or mayors from that party from across the country. They network and discuss politics for a few days, and at the end of the convention they have a straw poll, which is a kind of informal vote for who should be the party's candidate for president. The convention organizers publish the straw poll results for the press and the public, and so candidates can decide whether they have enough of a chance of winning to validate a big expensive campaign. There are about 20 of these straw polls nationwide over about a year. Candidates decide whether or not to run based both on their showing in these straw polls and how well their campaign fundraising is going. Before a candidate decides to run, they start an exploratory committee to start raising money and producing ads. If they're doing well on the straw polls and they're raising enough money to operate an effective campaign, they'll carefully choose the perfect place and time and announce their intention to run. They then have to file some paperwork with the Federal Election Commission, or FEC, to turn their exploratory committee into an official presidential campaign. Some combination of these campaigns, the press, and the political parties televised debates. There's quite a lot of candidates arguing about the rules that goes on behind the scenes, but the most important and consistent rule is that the candidates talk to the press interviewer and not to each other, except that is always broken. The production values on these debates have gone way up lately, and they have far larger audiences on TV and on the internet than ever before. The FEC is not involved with these debates for party nomination, but sometimes candidates that are not included in the debates will issue official complaints to the FEC, arguing that by excluding them from the debates, they're altering the outcome of the election, and thus the FEC should get involved. These complaints are purely symbolic and don't even warrant an investigation. The FEC recognizes these debates as internal issues of private organizations, because in U.S. tradition, political parties are not ever considered part of the government. You never hear about the Republicans or the Democrats forming a government in the United States. That's just not how our system works. Roughly a year before the election, the straw polls come to a close, and the official state political parties start holding their official state conventions. These state conventions are much more important than the straw polls, and come in a few different styles. A primary is very much like a traditional election, where folks vote anonymously in booths by pulling a lever or touching a touchscreen electronic voting device. A caucus, on the other hand, is a very public vote, where voters literally choose sides in a room, with each side representing a candidate, and as political issues are debated, if they change their mind, they literally change sides of the room. Caucus attendance is typically limited to party insiders, because the party doesn't want outsiders knowing which arguments most easily deprive their candidates of supporters. Primaries might also be closed to party members only, but can also be semi-closed, meaning that independent voters can attend exactly one party's convention, or completely open such that even members of the opposing party can attend. The idea of an open caucus has been tossed around mostly by Ron Paul supporters, but no one has tried it yet and is generally considered to be political suicide. The Republican Party holds more primaries, and the Democratic Party holds more caucuses. Both claim that this distinction shows that their party is more democratic. The Republicans because they have a larger voting base choosing the candidate, and the Democrats because the form of a caucus itself is more like a town meeting, where individual voters can exercise more influence. Really, though, it's the state parties who pick how the convention works, and the national parties are just putting a positive spin on things over which they have no say. Along with voting for candidates and publishing those results, these state conventions also elect party delegates, who vote in the official nomination ceremony to be held after all the state conventions are over at the massive national convention. Each state party is allocated a certain number of delegates by the federal party, roughly proportional to the state population. But states can lose delegates if they break various rules, such as making a contest out of who can hold their state convention first. Traditionally, the Iowa caucus is first, followed by the New Hampshire primary. Other states change their dates from time to time, and sometimes many states hold their conventions on the same day to increase their collective influence over the outcome. These days tend to have super names like Super Tuesday or Super Saturday, and the press covers them like the world is at stake. If the candidates are doing badly in these primaries and caucuses, or if their fundraising is not doing very well, they will drop out and endorse some remaining candidate. This continues until roughly half a year before the election, when the state conventions are all complete and the national convention is held. All the delegates from all the states are joined by representatives of the federal party's interests, called superdelegates, to officially nominate the party's candidate. Typically this is purely ceremonial because there's only one candidate left, but if there are a few left and no candidate has a majority of the delegates, it is possible for there to be round after round of votations until someone gets a majority. This hasn't happened in decades. One can skip all of that mess by running for president as an independent candidate, with the downside of almost certain defeat. After both major parties have nominated their candidates, the general election officially begins. The FEC starts getting involved in organizing televised debates. The campaign money really picks up, and the election ads grow from a trickle to a flood. The Federal Election Commission, or FEC, expects the 2012 presidential election campaigns to cost a total of $12 billion. Compare that to the FEC's own budget of less than $70 million, and you can see why campaign contributions are such a big deal. Speaking of money, there is an option to donate $3 to the sitting president campaign on the form Americans fill out when they file their taxes. Some say that's an unfair advantage for the sitting president, and I kind of agree. On the other hand, right after having filled out your taxes is probably the time you're least likely to want to vote for the current guy. By September, the candidates announce their selection for vice president, who helps them campaign as their running mate. Both the candidate and the running mate put in crazy hours to get little sleep for days at a time, giving speeches where the election is projected to be close and running their campaigns. The actual election date is the day after the first Monday of November, early enough that not a lot can change in November. If there's a last-minute turnaround of the election, it has to be in October. Since 1977, any game-changing political announcement that comes in October is critically described as an October surprise. The first October surprise was the announcement by the Nixon administration that peace was at hand in Vietnam, which appeared at the time to be a fulfillment of Nixon's campaign promise to end the war with honor, but turned out to be overly optimistic at best and possibly intentional voter manipulation. Every candidate fears the October surprise, and they often accuse each other of using it as an underhanded tactic, even if they haven't really done anything out of the ordinary. Finally, Election Day rolls around. Work and schools are closed, and the polls are open. The ballot will list the names of the candidates and their choice for vice president, and usually their political party. Nebraska doesn't allow the political party to appear on the ballots. The voter picks who they want and then goes home. All day and night, each state counts up their ballots to get a statewide popular vote. People stay up all night sometimes to see the press reports come in. It will take weeks before the absentee votes will arrive and be counted, especially those from soldiers and citizens living abroad. Votes from Americans living abroad count as if they still lived in whatever state they most recently lived in. During November, the individual states handle any recount or legal challenges in the election process. Voter fraud and breaking of campaign laws do happen. In the 2008 election cycle, the FEC enforced election law in 145 cases, collecting more than $500,000 in penalties. But that was in all elections, not just the one for president. After the states have tallied all their votes, they send representatives called electors to Washington, D.C. to officially deliver their election results. The number of electors each state is based on their population, with a minimum of 3, and it is updated every 10 years after the census. Typically, state law says that all of the electors from that state must vote for whoever got the most votes in the popular election, called first-past-the-post, winner-take-all. States can choose other methods, such as proportional representation, like Maine and Nebraska have done. Americans living in the territories rather than the states cannot vote for president because the territories do not have electors. However, the District of Columbia does have electors due to a law passed just for them. Also, anyone convicted of a felony loses their right to vote. On the Monday after the second Wednesday in December, this year that's the 15th, the electors gather in Washington, D.C. for a highly ignored ceremony called the Electoral College, where each casts one vote for their state. 98% of the time they vote exactly as instructed by their states, but a few screw something up by accident, like misspelling an A, and very rarely they even intentionally rebel in violation of law. This has never altered the outcome of an election, but some people worry that it could. If it ever does, we'll probably just fall back on what the state wanted, but it's never come up, so no one knows for sure. In the event of an exact tie in the Electoral College, or if the vote gets split 3 ways such that no single vote gets a majority, the new Congress, who is also elected on Election Day, then votes for who should be president. If that vote ties, the vice president from the outgoing administration casts the tie-breaking vote. In practice, it turns out rather like the popular vote with a bias in favor of states with very small populations. But there's obviously a lot more to it than that. And there you have it. That's the U.S. presidential election process. Happy voting!